as Bugatti refused to sell us parts.
But we just don't think it's safe, and that's why we can't support it.
And on top of that, they don't think it's possible.
It is not a statement, nor fact, nor is it meant to harm, defame, or misrepresent any brand or company. This guy out there, Mat Armstrong, that wants to come and fix the vehicle, but we need to make sure that we could preserve the brand.
A car that Bugatti itself had given up on just came roaring back to life. And it happened at the exact same moment the company that owned Bugatti was quietly changing hands at the very top. If you have spent any time near car videos in the last few months, you already know that something strange has been circling Bugatti for a while now. This spring, that strange feeling finally turned into a real, undeniable event. A wrecked Chiron. One that Bugatti had already written off as a dead machine with no future, started up again inside a small workshop far away from any official factory. British car builder Mat Armstrong and his small team of helpers managed to fire up that huge, complicated engine after countless people online had said, over and over, that it would never turn over again. When that moment spread across social media, it felt like something genuinely big had just happened. It felt like a line had been crossed, the kind of line that a brand as rich and powerful as Bugatti was never supposed to allow anyone outside its walls to cross. But this story did not stop with just one engine turning over inside a small garage. It grew into something much bigger than a single car, and this is the part that most people watching from home completely missed. In the spring of 2026, Porsche made the decision to sell off its entire share of Bugatti Rimac and step away from a whole arrangement it had been part of for years. A group of international investors moved in quickly to take that stake instead. And just like that, the long relationship between the huge Volkswagen car empire and Bugatti was quietly coming to an end after all this time. For almost 3 decades, that giant German company has stood firmly behind the Bugatti brand, shaping it, funding it, and guiding it from behind the scenes without most fans ever noticing. Now it was walking out the door completely, at the exact same moment that a builder from England was making global headlines by reviving one of its most valuable cars without asking for any permission at all. You really have to stop and think about how rare that kind of timing actually is in the real world. The company at the very heart of this whole storm was changing owners at the highest possible level, while at the same exact time, a tiny team working out a private workshop was quietly proving that something Bugatti had called impossible could actually be done by regular people with enough skill and patience. Mat Rimac, the man now steering the entire Bugatti company, had spent the previous several months locked in a very public argument about whether any of this rebuild should even be allowed to happen in the first place. Strangely, though, his tone had slowly begun to soften over time, in a way that made a lot of people watching lean closer to their screens and wonder what was really going on behind those tall factory walls in France. To really understand why grown adults were arguing about a single car in comment sections late into the night, you first have to rewind all the way back to the exact moment the internet first realized what was quietly being attempted inside that small workshop, far away from anyone official. None of this felt like a simple coincidence to the people watching closely, because 2 enormous stories were unfolding at the exact same time, and both of them were somehow about the same single company. One story was about who legally owned Bugatti at the very top of the business. The other story was about who really had the right to touch a Bugatti down at the bottom, out in a workshop. Put those 2 threads together side by side, and you can start to understand why this one small crash car ended up meaning so much more to so many people than its huge price tag alone could ever fully explain on its own. It was power changing hands twice at once, quietly at the top and loudly in the garage. The whole story truly began with a short video clip that stopped people mid-scroll, the kind of clip that spreads fast online because it genuinely feels impossible to believe at first glance. Word slowly got out that a wrecked Bugatti Chiron, a car carrying a price tag that most ordinary people will never even see in their entire lifetime, was sitting quietly inside a private workshop somewhere in England. A self-taught mechanic from the city of Leicester was planning to bring that broken car back from the dead, with absolutely no help or blessing from Bugatti at all. This was not just any ordinary Bugatti either, which made the whole situation even more dramatic. It was a purse sport, one of only around 60 examples ever built by the factory, which meant that every single panel on that specific car was rarer than solid gold and nearly impossible to replace if it ever broke or got damaged further. But the thing that truly made people online lose their minds was not the original crash itself. It was what Bugatti chose to do next once news of the crash reached the company. Bugatti reached into its own internal computer systems and completely locked the car's identity number, effectively freezing it out. In plain, simple terms, this meant that no dealership anywhere on the entire planet was legally allowed to sell replacement parts for that one specific machine ever again. The car had basically been branded, blacklisted, and treated like something that was supposed to quietly disappear forever and never be spoken of again. The moment that particular piece of news spread across the internet, the story stopped being about a single broken supercar sitting in a garage. It instantly became about something much bigger, something that ordinary, everyday people actually cared deeply about, because it touched on basic ideas of fairness and ownership that everyone could relate to. Mat Armstrong's own personal story only made this whole situation even more gripping to watch unfold. This was a man with millions of loyal subscribers who had built his entire online career and reputation by buying broken machines that nobody else wanted and slowly turning them into something whole and beautiful again. He had already done this successfully with a Rolls-Royce that once belonged to a famous professional footballer, and also with other cars that had smashed directly into people's houses during accidents. But everyone watching online clearly understood that a Bugatti was a completely different kind of animal compared to those earlier projects. This was not simply an expensive car to fix. It was one of the most technically complex machines ever built by human hands, made by a company that clearly had absolutely no intention of letting an outsider prove them wrong in public. What almost nobody watching saw coming next was that this entire fight was about to get deeply personal, because the single most powerful man inside the entire Bugatti company was about to step out of the shadows and respond to Mat directly, in his own words, on camera for the whole world to see. Up until that point, most fans had only heard silence from the official Bugatti side of things, which made every small update from Mat feel like the only honest window into what was really happening. That silence was about to break in a way nobody quite expected. And once it broke, the whole tone of the story would shift from a quiet online rumor into a genuine news event that regular car magazines and websites would soon be forced to cover as well, whether they wanted to or not. That shift alone told viewers something important about how much this small workshop story had already grown. Normally, when a small independent creator pokes at a giant multinational company online, the giant company simply stays completely silent and quietly lets its team of lawyers handle everything behind closed doors, far away from public view. That is not at all what happened in this particular story, and that is exactly why the saga kept climbing higher and higher in popularity. Mate Rimac, the man who now runs the entire Bugatti company, did something almost unheard of for someone sitting in his powerful position. He personally picked up his own phone, recorded a video of himself talking directly to the camera, and spoke straight to the millions of people who were closely following this entire drama online. He looked directly into the lens and calmly said that a lot of what people were hearing about Bugatti's official service and repair costs was simply not true at all. With that one simple move, he instantly turned what had been a small YouTube saga into a genuine public standoff between a billion-dollar global car brand and one determined man working alone inside a small workshop. His main argument throughout all of this was never really about money, even though the amount of money involved in the whole situation was genuinely staggering to think about. His real argument was about safety, and he explained his case in a way that truly stuck with people long after they finished watching the video. He talked at length about testing a Bugatti Hypercar in extremely brutal cold weather, somewhere around negative 20 degrees, and discovering during that test that the leather covering the dashboard grew so incredibly stiff in the freezing cold that it could actually interfere with the airbags firing properly the exact way they were originally designed to. That single small detail did more convincing work than any boring technical spec sheet ever could, because it planted a real, genuine sense of fear directly into people's chests as they listened. If a change as small and simple as stiff leather could turn an entire safety system into a real danger for the driver, then something rebuilt outside the official factory suddenly felt like a serious gamble with a real person's life on the line. Rimac also pushed back hard and directly against the wildly exaggerated repair cost figures that were floating around freely online at the time. While some people online loudly claimed that a single replacement headlight alone cost enough money to buy an entire house outright, Rimac firmly insisted that the real actual numbers were only a small fraction of that wildly exaggerated amount. He was clearly trying his best to drag the whole heated conversation back down to solid reality, away from internet rumors. He also reminded everyone watching that only a tiny handful of specially trained people across the entire world even know how to safely separate certain delicate parts of these incredibly complex hypercars without causing damage. In his own carefully chosen words, supporting a backyard rebuild of a car this complicated simply was not the responsible thing for Bugatti to publicly do, no matter how much he personally respected the raw effort and obvious skill behind Mat's ongoing project. For a good while, this whole situation looked like nothing more than an honest disagreement between two proud, strong-willed men who each genuinely believed they were completely right in their own way. One of them stood firmly for the basic freedom to fix something that you personally and legally own. The other man stood firmly for the safety of a machine that can move faster than most small airplanes at the exact moment they lift off the ground and leave the runway behind. Both sides of this argument had real logic behind them, which is exactly why it kept so many viewers hooked instead of picking one obvious villain right away. It would have been easy to simply cheer for the underdog mechanic and ignore Rimac's safety points completely, but the cold weather airbag story was hard to dismiss, and it forced a lot of people watching to sit with real doubt instead of easy certainty, which made the whole story feel far more honest than a simple hero versus villain tale. But the deeper Mat got into the actual physical rebuild of the car, the more he slowly began to notice something that did not sit quite right with him. A nagging feeling that the company speaking to him so publicly was not entirely united or in agreement behind the closed scenes. This marks the exact moment the story shifted away from a loud, public shouting match and turned into something much quieter, and honestly, a little more unsettling to watch play out over time. As the months slowly rolled on, the general tone coming out of official Bugatti channels slowly started to change in small, but very noticeable ways. What had originally started out as a firm and total refusal gradually bent and softened into something else entirely different. At first, the company flatly refused to sell even a single bolt for that specific wrecked car, no matter how small, cheap, or unimportant the individual part seemed to be. Then, somewhere along the way as time passed, the strict blacklist that had frozen the car out of every single parts department in the entire world was quietly and silently lifted, without much public explanation given. A full factory repair job that had once been quoted at an enormous, almost unbelievable price was suddenly being offered instead at a far smaller and more reasonable number than before. Mat clearly noticed this strange shift happening, and he was completely honest and open about how strange the whole thing genuinely felt to him personally as it unfolded. He openly said out loud that he did not personally believe this sudden change was coming from Rimac acting alone on his own judgment. He got the distinct sense that there was someone else standing quietly behind the words he was hearing directly, that the actual messages reaching him were being carefully shaped by other people whose real names he would probably never learn or discover. It is a kind of unsettling thing that makes your skin prickle just a little bit. The simple idea that important decisions about your own personal project are being quietly made somewhere by unnamed voices sitting in a room that you yourself are not even allowed to enter or know exists. Mat simply said in a calm and measured way that the overall tone had clearly changed and that he personally found it strange, and then he respectfully let his large audience draw their own private conclusions from there instead of pushing his own theory too hard onto them. That particular kind of quiet honesty is a big part of why so many people online ended up trusting him far more than they trusted a massive global company with an entire professional marketing department working hard behind around the clock. When a giant company speaks in a careful, polished, and heavily rehearsed corporate voice, and a completely normal guy speaks instead, like your close mate chatting with you across the pub table, most of us know deep down inside exactly who we are naturally inclined to believe and trust more. While all of this quiet back and forth conversation played out slowly through private emails and scattered public interviews behind the scenes, the thing that truly stunned casual viewers the most was not actually being decided inside any corporate boardroom at all. It was instead quietly taking shape out on a humble workshop floor, one seemingly impossible part at a time, in ways that the official factory in France had always sworn up and down could never actually be accomplished by anyone working outside their own walls. Every single video update Mat posted during this stretch felt like a small victory lap, not because he was gloating, but because each one quietly chipped away at the idea that Bugatti's knowledge was some kind of sacred secret only a chosen few could ever touch. Viewers started tuning in less for drama and more to simply watch a hard problem get solved, which is a rare thing for any online story to achieve. There's a quiet satisfaction in watching someone solve a puzzle experts insisted had no answer. This next stretch of the story still feels almost genuinely unbelievable, because it shows a small team of ordinary people doing exactly what a company worth many billions of dollars had confidently sworn could never be done by outsiders without proper training. Without any official factory parts, and without receiving any kind of formal blessing from Bugatti's home base over in France, Matt and the small group of people working closely around him started solving one difficult problem after another, problems that would have made most professional repair shops simply turn around and walk away in complete defeat. The specific airbags that the car desperately needed to be safe again were sourced in the most unlikely and surprising way imaginable. They were carefully pulled from a completely ordinary, everyday Audi, the exact kind of common car you might casually see parked in any regular supermarket parking lot, and then skillfully adapted to fit properly inside a rare hypercar instead. The individual part numbers were close enough in size and shape to actually work together. Even though the official factory would probably never openly admit that simple fact even 100 years from now, then there were the many radiators involved. And this is truly where the entire story becomes almost impossible for most people to fully believe. A Chiron carries a small army of individual radiators tucked carefully all around its body, all working together constantly to keep that massive, powerful engine from completely overheating and effectively cooking itself from the inside out. Replacing these radiators the official, approved way through Bugatti was completely off the table from the very beginning of the project. So instead, the small team built brand new radiators entirely by hand, completely from scratch using raw materials, carefully fabricating cooling parts for one of the single most complicated engines ever built by human engineers, all done inside a modest private workshop using fairly basic hand tools. When that incredible car finally started up again successfully and the engine temperatures held perfectly steady under load, it became living, breathing proof that the special technical knowledge locked away tightly inside Bugatti was not nearly as untouchable or impossible to understand as the entire world had always been carefully led to believe by the company itself. One of the single most telling moments in this entire wild saga came directly from a broken transmission mount found on the car. On these specific hypercars, that particular mount is actually designed on purpose by engineers to shatter completely during a serious crash, working as part of a clever built-in safety system meant to protect the human driver inside. Rather than sit around begging Bugatti for an official replacement part that was clearly never actually going to arrive, the small team simply took the original broken mount, welded it carefully back together with their own two hands, and confidently carried on with the difficult rebuild. They even had to painstakingly work out the exact correct tightness needed for certain critical bolts by pausing Bugatti's own official factory training videos on a screen and studying each frame closely, one at a time, quietly reading precise numbers straight off footage made by the very same company that had flatly refused to help them in any meaningful way at all. It is worth pausing on that detail for a moment, because it captures the entire spirit of this whole rebuild perfectly. A small team with no factory support was forced to become detectives, treating publicly available footage almost like buried treasure, digging through it frame by frame for clues that the official company would never simply hand over on its own. It was slow, careful work, and it proved that patience and curiosity could achieve what money and connections had already been refused to provide. There is something deeply human and relatable about every single piece of this remarkable story, and that is very likely exactly why it hit so many ordinary people so hard when they first heard the full details online. It is fundamentally the story of plain, ordinary human determination quietly beating out expensive corporate secrecy, one small step at a time without any shortcuts. It stands as a strong and simple reminder that behind every intimidating wall of polished corporate branding and clever marketing, a car is still just a machine at the very end of the day. And machines of any kind can always be understood by regular people who genuinely care enough to try their absolute hardest and keep learning as they go. Every single homemade radiator built by hand and every carefully welded bracket became a quiet, silent answer to a company that spent many years telling its own paying customers that they were completely helpless and powerless without receiving official permission first. That is exactly what eventually pushed this entire saga past the small, narrow borders of the car enthusiast world and directly into a much larger, more important argument that has actually been quietly building and boiling for many years now. A genuine argument about who truly holds a real power over the physical things we honestly believe we fully own outright. If you strip away the fancy Bugatti badge entirely and set aside the many millions of dollars involved in the whole story, what you're honestly left with is a simple, direct question that actually touches nearly every single person watching this story unfold from their own home. When you personally buy something with your own hard-earned money, do you actually and truly own that thing completely, or are you instead simply renting the limited right to use it under a strict set of rules that were set entirely by the original maker of that product? This entire wild saga became a powerful and clear symbol for that exact same ongoing fight, the one that many people commonly refer today as the right to repair movement. Farmers all across the country have already battled hard over this exact same core issue for years with their own expensive modern tractors. Everyday phone owners have also battled fiercely over this exact same issue too, constantly dealing with sealed batteries that they simply cannot easily open up and replace themselves at home. And now, somehow, against all odds, a single wrecked hypercar had quietly become the loudest and most dramatic example of this entire ongoing fight. Because if one determined man could be flatly told that he was not allowed to fix a car that he personally and legally owned outright, then that exact same troubling idea directly touched every single person watching the story unfold from home, no matter what they personally drove. That is really why so many people who will never come anywhere close to affording a Bugatti still found themselves glued to this story from start to finish. They were not just watching a rich man's toy get fixed. They were watching a real test case for a bigger question that quietly affects almost every product any of us ever buy, from the car in our own driveway to the phone sitting in our pocket right now. In a strange way, a hypercar most of us will only ever see in photos became the clearest, most dramatic example of a fight that ordinary people quietly face all the time, just on a much smaller and less flashy scale. That is part of why the comments under every single update on the story filled up so fast with people sharing their own small, personal versions of the exact same frustration. What makes this entire story even richer and far more interesting to think about is the personal background of the specific man who was defending Bugatti's official side of this whole heated argument. Mate Rimac did not come from old inherited family money, and he did not simply inherit a ready-made business empire from wealthy relatives handed down to him. He actually started out many years ago as a young, unknown man working completely alone inside a small home garage, taking one single old